What did you see? What did you really see? Two men, masks, guns firing. You want the death penalty brought back, but only for really bad crimes, for mass murder of the innocents. But what did you see? Did you see their faces as they pulled the trigger? What you believe is what you were told. You went there. You don't really know. When the gallows open, when the switch is flicked, when the syringe is squeezed, there is no court of appeal, no remedy to undo death.
This European Union is based upon the pillar of rule of law, democracy and fundamental rights. And it does not contradict freedom and security and justice.
You must get a balance between people's privacy, the use of data, into whose hands the data ever finds itself, how long it is retained and for what purposes. And that must be, as the Court of Justice suggested, proportional.
The whole idea of a balance between rights and civil liberties and security is just a false construct. There is no reason that liberties have to be sacrificed in order to maintain security. The proper construct from Amnesty International's point of view is that all counterterrorism measures must comport with human rights. It's not that one is against the other, it's that one is necessary for the other.
On the face of it, the Charlie Hebdo attack was a calculated massacre, and the attackers almost certainly had a wider support network. They didn't just kill people with guns. They have tried to burn down democracy.
I think it's important from my perspective as a legislator who is trying to put in place certain, I think, useful measures to deal with terrorists and major criminals, that we don't overreact.
There are very calculated people in government who see an opportunity to implement policies and practices that are repressive in nature. And it is that kind of opportunism that we all should, be alert to and be thoughtful about in the immediate aftermath of attacks like this.
The corrupt wait for moments such as the Charlie Hebdo attack, where there's money to be made, power to be gained. A few will use populism to leverage greater control of society. They exploit the fear of the population, pressuring governments to act quickly or risk electoral disaster.
I think it's unacceptable to use the Paris attacks as an excuse to actually do more measures that infringe privacy and integrity in Europe. I think it would be a shameful move from those decision makers.
It was the day after the Paris attacks that we heard, we're going to keep foreign fighters out, we're going to surveil the internet, we're going to clamp down on the definition of terrorism, all these things came out immediately.
We need to have a completely cool brain. Stay with the brain, the head very cool, but still a warm heart. And always try to keep the hands clean.
When we walk on the streets of Paris, London, Brussels, Berlin, Je suis Charlie was not simply about the brutal slaughter of journalists. It was an attack on our way of life. We were not the rude and provocative cartoonists. This was not our narrative. We are the pursuit of freedom. So what did you see? Did you see freedom shiver as politicians rushed to provide security? Did you see your privacy diminished? As the guns fell silent for a moment, did you hear screaming hashtags? 70 people arrested in France alone for rude and provocative words written on Facebook. Did they not have the right to insult and to offend?
In most of the major attacks that we have seen, 9/11, London bombings, Madrid bombings, now the Paris attacks, the people who have committed these crimes in the main have already been on the radar of the intelligence and security apparatus in those countries. In other words, the existing tools that they already had worked to some extent. Failures of intelligence were really the problem.
The Paris attacks and the Brussels attacks shows us that sometimes we have more data that we make use of, and sometimes we need some data. For example, PNR is one thing. The Brussels criminal he arrived in Frankfurt because he knew that Germany doesn't have a PNR. Belgium has a PNR, so he didn't arrive in Belgium on the airport. So he has chosen Frankfurt. So we know we need European solutions with a clear data protection standard, but with a clear overview that we have to prevent that security is an important field and that we have to prevent attacks.
PNR data, passenger name records, is information provided by passengers during the reservation and booking of tickets and when checking in on flights, as well as that collected by air carriers for their own commercial purposes. The Commission is currently negotiating a proposal for a European PNR system with the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament.
I've been sitting with a report now for 3 years. 3 years ago, I was making it clear that I believed that passenger name records with standards common across Europe, all the countries of Europe, was what we needed to have in order to not prevent, but certainly to help us in the fight against terrorism and, as I say, to deal with major criminality, which has become a real problem on our continent.
We would like to see the PNR, but it needs to be based on the recent case law with the rejection of the data retention directive. That has to be taken into deep consideration, and we need to do it ensuring fundamental rights. So we need to put in place the data protection directive before moving ahead.
If you have investigations by the police, they need a court decision if they want to enter a house and take a look which data are there. And I think if we have such rules also, there is a kind of protection there. So the storage as such is not against data protection, but the use of it must be cleared, and there must be clear and strict rules about that.
We have already the European Court of Justice that have said that the data retention directive is not it is in breach of the Charter of Fundamental Rights. So we're already going beyond what is actually acceptable. So in that sense, I think we should trust our judicial institution and take that with us and change the data retention directive. It's very urgent even.
After the September 11th attacks in the United States, lessons have been learned. Today in Europe, these lessons must be remembered. The CIA rendition and torture scandal proved that conspiracies don't stay hidden. Too many people, too many places, the truth will always leak out. Transparency and the steady, calm rule of law are the safest and most effective strategies for counter-terrorism. Retaining our personal data should not be a risk to our freedom, so long as we trust those who hold our information.
Governments need to show themselves to be more trustworthy, and we've seen very little evidence of that. We've seen the UK government hacking into telecommunication systems in Belgium, for example. The UK government is the leader in European home affairs policy. How much can we possibly trust a European home affairs strategy that's designed and led by the UK?
What we do need in Europe at this moment is a fully fledged intelligence service. There is this intel that is an embryonic piece that could be really built up into a well-functioning intelligence service.
I think the police needs more physical resources and personal and staff that are educated in a better way. They have difficulties in being as fast as, let's say, criminals or others, because they have stricter rules what they are allowed to do and what not. Perhaps there we need also sometimes a bit flexibility in cases of danger, in cases of necessary steps that have to be done fast.
National security accountability is not simply a case of applying the law. We need many more specialist lawyers and judges capable of enforcing stronger judicial oversight, and they must have real authority and independence. Otherwise, how can we ensure accountability when governments can so easily hide behind the very broad declaration of national security?
That's the one question nobody wants to answer, because if there were a clear political leadership on that question, then there would be a measure to which national security services could be held to account.
There are people who would want to see everything through the counterterrorism lens, because counterterrorism presents you with an emergency, and an emergency calls for exceptional measures. with exceptional measures, you can target people in ways that you can't when there is not an emergency.
Surveillance and data privacy is not just about raw data, it's about the analysis of data. Today, algorithms are used to build personal profiles, marketing companies do it for consumer campaigns, and security agencies use similar algorithms to counter crime and terrorism. Marketing companies may be a nuisance, but security profiling is now being used to predict future behavior, to determine who is a security risk, to predict who will break the law.
Algorithms in a technical way are used to find out if there is a special type or a special kind of behavior of persons that is typical for, let's say, high-risk persons or high-risk individuals or terrorists.
It's our citizens within our countries that are radicalized, and we have to be very careful and have to find solutions for this and not only focus on security measures.
We have to create a less polarized society where people feel included and not marginalized. And here, for us, it is a long-term battle. We cannot have segregation the way we have it. We have to have future, we have to have work, we have to have non-discrimination and fundamental rights. Not for one part of the population, for everyone.
The question of integration is something that has to be answered, and if we are not giving answers to this, then again and again young people will feel outside society and will be in danger to be radicalized.
The first thing that European legislators should do is take a look at the last decade to see how much the overreaction to 9/11 has damaged the rule of law. It's damaged civil liberties, it's damaged human rights, it's damaged community relations. If nothing else, learn those lessons.
If the political oversight and judicial control is strong, transparent and efficient, we can probably live with a balance of reasonable and proportionate interventions to help improve security. But what if that political oversight and judicial control is in the hands of Marine Le Pen in France, Jobbik in Hungary, or under the influence of the neo-Nazi party Golden Dawn in Greece? How will your personal data be used then? How will your expression be? Free? Our counter-terrorism laws, our privacy laws, our personal freedoms are at risk of corruption. Our liberty is more deeply threatened by populist policies than by bloodthirsty jihadis. And when it comes to the death penalty, with the jihadis at least, we don't need it.